Well, if you're currently involved in the BP oil spill class action lawsuit, or if you know of someone who's been affected by it, our guest today will be able to help all of us better understand what has been described as a very, very complicated lawsuit.
Val's my good friend. He was gracious enough to come back on our show for a second week in a row to talk about class action lawsuits. Val's been involved in some very high-profile cases around the nation, and he says he's never seen anything like this BP case. Why is that, Val? Tell us why is this case so unique?
Thank you, John. Thank you, Shauna. Happy to be here. The BP settlement, a proposed settlement, is in fact unique in my experience. First off, the causation requirement is not there. You don't have to prove that your damages were actually caused as a result of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. That in itself makes it unique. Secondly, the folks that are in charge of administering the fund, in paying out the money, are actually charged by the judge to do everything they can possibly do to maximize the amount of the money that an individual business or an individual claimant is going to receive or would receive pursuant to the settlement. That too is unique. Never in my experience have you had the combination of no need to prove causation, that is, no need to prove that your damages were actually caused as a result of the oil spill, and you have the folks administering the plan who are, because it's unlimited in many respects, seeking to maximize the amount of the settlement money that the folks would be receiving.
And how many people are we talking about? How many businesses, how many individuals are we?
Right. BP estimates that there's approximately 600,000 businesses that are eligible and 4.5 million individuals. So you're talking about a proposed settlement class in excess of 5 million claimants.
Right, but you said you don't have to actually prove that the oil spill caused your problems, but isn't that the whole point of the lawsuit?
One would think, but again, Shauna, we're not talking about a lawsuit. We're not talking about the merits of the case.
Okay.
We're talking about a settlement that has been negotiated, purportedly arm's length, right, between the plaintiff steering committee, those lawyers appointed by the judge to represent the claimants, and BP. So what we're talking about is a compromise, a settlement that the two sides have come together and are recommending to the court to approve. Lots of folks are objecting to it, but nonetheless, those involved are proposing to the court that they approve this settlement. And in the settlement, large numbers of folks, those people in Zone A in the settlement, do not have to prove causation. Likewise, none of the folks in the seafood industry have to prove causation. That is, that any of their damages were directly caused as a result of the oil spill.
We have the map up on the screen now, and you can see where Zone A is on the map, and Zone B. People in Zone A, they were the closest to where the rig explosion were.
Right. If you look at Zone A, you'll see that it is closest in proximity. It's the coastal zone. It's the area closest in proximity to where the well was, right, and where the impact, the visible oil, impacted the shore. And so Zone A folks are the closest in, if you will. And then, as you can see from the different colors, there's Zone B and C and D and on down the line.
And so right now, this settlement, this is the $7.8 billion settlement that we're talking about, potentially $7.8 billion settlement. And then prior to that, there was the $20 billion fund that Ken Feinberg oversaw. Now, for people who took advantage of that, are they included in this? Are they excluded from this settlement? How does that all work?
Right. Well, arguably they're still included unless they executed a full and final release of BP as part and parcel of what they received before. There are folks who are trying to challenge that, and they may very well be successful in their challenge of any release that somebody executed pursuant to the GCCF program.
Okay. All right. And one of the things that you said last week, which was really very, very interesting, you said in order for a class action lawsuit to be considered class action, there has to be commonality.
Yes.
Right? And there has to be something common to everybody who's involved in this case. But are there some variables that could affect this case in particular?
Absolutely. And the commonality here, Shauna, and again, that's something that makes this case so unique, the settlement so unique. Because causation is out of the picture, the commonality now is damages. The fact that you sustained some loss, whether or not you can actually prove that it was as a result of the oil spill or not, is irrelevant for Zone A folks. Simply because you suffered some economic loss that you can prove by looking at your tax returns, your income statements, etc., you can prove that you sustained a loss. That's all you need to do. You don't have to prove that the oil spill caused the loss.
Well, let me jump in here, and maybe as an example, somebody sitting at home, they're watching this, and they're saying, well, you know, I owned a seafood restaurant, and business really dropped off. People didn't want to eat seafood for a while after the spill. I couldn't get I couldn't sell oysters to save my life afterwards, and I had a big decrease in business. And maybe as a analogy or a parallel, somebody who maybe worked at a seafood restaurant, they lost their job and they couldn't get a job and they couldn't pay their mortgage, and they had a domino effect, and a lot of financial catastrophe happened. And maybe they were in Zone B. Zone A is easiest because it's closest, and it's easy to understand that they were affected. Why don't you define for us how those people would proceed? They show up with their tax returns, they show up with their pink slips saying they lost their job. Why don't you walk us through that?
All right, two things to keep in mind there. All businesses in Zone A qualify, actually all businesses period qualify, unless you're in oil and gas, banking, insurance, you're in the investment fund business, or you're a real estate developer, or you're a defense contractor. Mm-hmm. If you're not in one of those specifically excluded classifications, you qualify. So it's not just the seafood restaurant, it's the hairdresser, the bartender, the janitorial service
It
fellow.
sounds like everybody.
Everybody, right? Other than one of those excluded classes. That's extremely important for people to remember and keep in mind, because they wouldn't normally think that they would qualify for this fund, but they do.
Zones A through what? Everybody applies. Every single zone.
No. Every zone, the folks who are excluded apply to all zones.
Right.
All right.
But everybody can apply for damages.
Yes. Okay. And it's only folks in Zone A that don't have to prove causation, or if you're in the seafood industry or some offshoot of the seafood industry, you don't have to prove causation. Okay?
So is this why we could see potentially restaurants all over the state, in other parts of the country, taking part in this?
Well, not necessarily all parts of the country, Shauna.
Okay.
It's still limited by the zones as per the map, right?
Okay.
But all of the state of Louisiana, for example, is in the map. So you could be a business in Shreveport or Monroe or Alexandria.
Well, quick question. Suppose I lost my job in the seafood restaurant, but I got a job doing cleanup, and I made twice as much money. How does that affect the...
Well, you're getting into some of the particulars of individual circumstances that, again, the other thing to really keep in mind as to this settlement, it is extremely complex. And if I had one word of advice to anybody who even believes there's any remote possibility that they may qualify under the settlement or proposed settlement, seek out qualified counsel to represent you. And it's not just any Tom, Dick, or Harry that is out there.
But how do they do that then? Because we're running short on time. How do they do that?
They go and they search for folks who are familiar with the BP litigation, and CPAs, because you're going to need CPAs who are familiar with the different formula matrices and how to run the numbers.
A lawyer can help them find a CPA, though,
absolutely.
Right? Okay.
How to run the numbers to maximize the amount of money that they'd be entitled to receive under the proposed settlement.
Okay, but we have to take a break right now, but we have many, many more questions. We're going to get our viewers involved this time around, involved in this discussion about BP and class action lawsuits. The viewer questions are coming up next, so stick around. We'll be right back.